No one screamed. That was what terrified the Empire most. Not the red lightning splitting the heavens. Not the tidal surges climbing city walls. Not the tremors cracking palace foundations. The silence. For 3 days, the capital world of Virax Prime had trembled beneath a sky the color of spilled blood. Storm systems twisted unnaturally above the throne spire. Bolts of crimson lightning carved scars across the atmosphere. Entire districts had been evacuated as pressure waves rolled outward from the imperial palace. But inside the sanctum, there was no sound. The Dragon Empress had not spoken. And when a Dragon Empress does not speak, worlds wait to burn. The air was dead. Prince Kael, the first flame of the Empire, future sovereign of 1,000 systems, had been killed during what officials called a border inspection malfunction. The official statement lasted 14 seconds. The galaxy did not believe it. Sabotage. Assassination. Internal betrayal. Foreign interference. The theories spread faster than the storms. War fleets across Imperial space-powered reactors to combat readiness. Admirals requested permission to mobilize. Generals demanded retaliation protocols. Intelligence divisions scrambled for culprits. But no orders came. Because the Empress had sealed herself inside the throne sanctum. And the sky had begun to weep fire. Dragon royalty were not symbolic rulers. They were bound to planetary biospheres through ancient biosymbiotic engineering. Their emotions did not remain internal. They manifested. Grief fed the atmosphere. Rage ignited tectonics. Despair destabilized oceans. Virax Prime was not under attack. It was mourning. And if that grief turned to fury, entire star systems would pay the price. Outside the sanctum doors, obsidian 50 meters high, the High General stood motionless. Their armor reflected red flashes from the sky. Priests of the Eternal Ember knelt in concentric circles, chanting stabilization rites that barely slowed the atmospheric collapse. No one dared enter. Because inside those doors sat not merely a ruler, but a mother. And every being in the palace understood one brutal truth. If she chose vengeance, the Empire would follow without hesitation. If she chose extermination, the fleets would comply. If she chose annihilation, the galaxy would burn. Deep beneath the upper halls, far from strategy chambers and ritual balconies, maintenance corridors hummed with failing power relays. Emergency crews had abandoned non-essential sectors. Most palace staff had been dismissed. Most. A lone cleaning cart rolled across polished stone floors. Its wheels squeaked faintly in the vast corridor. The sound felt almost disrespectful in the quiet. Daniel Mercer paused at the intersection beneath the throne spire. He looked up at the ceiling as another tremor rippled through the structure. Dust fell like gray snow. He had worked in the palace for 6 years. He cleaned hallways no noble noticed. Polished banisters no claws ever touched. Fixed filtration vents beneath ceremonial chambers. He was invisible. Which was how humans often survived in foreign empires. Another thunderclap detonated overhead. The lights flickered. Daniel steadied the cart. He shouldn't be here. All non-essential staff were ordered to evacuate upper sectors. But the lower corridors still needed stabilizing. Fire suppression systems were failing. Atmospheric seals were fluctuating. And if the palace collapsed, nothing else would matter. He turned the corner. Ahead, 3 Imperial guards stood outside a lift platform leading upward toward the sanctum level. Their armor shimmered bronze and crimson. Their eyes burned faintly, pupils slit with restrained flame. They were not guarding against invasion. They were guarding against interruption. Daniel stopped several meters away. The guards stared at him as if he were already dead. Maintenance sectors are closed, one growled. Daniel swallowed. I know. Another tremor shook the corridor. Far above, something cracked like splitting glass. The guard's voice lowered. You hear it, human? Daniel nodded. Everyone heard it. The sound of a throne that had not been occupied for 3 days. The sound of a ruler who had not given command. The sound of a mother who had lost her child. And beneath it all, the building pressure of a storm that was no longer just weather. It was grief. The guard's gaze hardened. No one approaches her. Daniel looked past them toward the lift. Toward the sanctum. Toward the epicenter of the storm. I'm not approaching the Empress, he said quietly. The lightning outside intensified, shaking the walls. He met the guard's burning eyes. I'm approaching someone who's alone. For a moment, even the thunder seemed to pause. And above them, the sky cracked open. The lift rose in silence. Not mechanical silence. Oppressive silence. The kind that presses against your ribs and reminds you how small you are. Daniel stood alone inside the transparent column as it ascended through the heart of the throne spire. Below him, the capital stretched outward in spirals of black stone and molten gold illumination. Above him, red lightning spiderwebbed across the atmosphere. Every few seconds, the entire world flickered. The biosphere was destabilizing. And everyone knew why. Halfway up the spire, the lift shuddered violently. A shockwave rolled through the structure, strong enough to crack reinforced crystal. Daniel braced himself against the railing. His reflection stared back at him in the glass, pale, tired, painfully human. He almost turned back. Almost. Instead, he exhaled slowly. He remembered the prince. Not as first flame of the empire. Not as future sovereign. But as a boy standing in a maintenance corridor 6 months ago, staring at a faulty coolant pipe. Daniel had been on a ladder, tightening a valve. The prince had asked him what he was doing. Stopping something small from becoming something big, Daniel had replied. The boy had laughed. Is that how humans fight wars? Daniel had smiled. Sometimes. The memory hit harder than the tremors. The lift stopped. The doors opened. Heat rolled into the chamber like a living thing. 2 massive imperial guards stood at the entrance to the sanctum level. Unlike the lower guards, these wore ceremonial armor etched with ancestral flame patterns. Their wings were partially unfurled, agitation visible in the tension of their scales. One step beyond them. The obsidian doors. 50 meters high. Sealed. The air here shimmered from temperature distortion. Daniel stepped out of the lift. Both guards locked onto him instantly. You should not be here, one said, voice vibrating like distant thunder. Daniel nodded. I've been told. The second guard's eyes narrowed. Do you understand what sits beyond those doors? He did. The most powerful biological entity in known imperial space. A sovereign capable of igniting fleets. A being whose grief was destabilizing planetary weather systems. He understood. But he also understood something else. Yes, Daniel said softly. I understand. Lightning struck the spire directly overhead. The entire chamber flashed white. One of the guards leaned closer. If she turns her rage outward, he whispered, there will be no warning. Daniel met his gaze. I'm not here to stop her. Silence stretched. Then why? The guard demanded. Daniel hesitated. How do you explain something so small in the face of something so vast? I don't think she needs generals right now. Another tremor shook the chamber. From behind the doors. A sound. Not a roar. Not fury. Something worse. A fractured, broken exhale. The guard stiffened. Daniel's throat tightened. He had heard that sound once before. In a hospital hallway on Earth. When a doctor walked out and didn't have good news. He stepped forward. Both guards moved instantly, blocking him. You will die, one said flatly. Probably, Daniel answered. The honesty startled them. Humans were strange in the Empire. Fragile. Soft. Short-lived. But sometimes. Unpredictable. The first guard studied him. You are maintenance caste. Daniel almost smiled. Janitorial, technically. A crack split across the ceiling from another atmospheric surge. Stone dust fell between them. The guard's voice dropped lower. Why risk yourself for a sovereign who does not know your name? Daniel looked at the doors. At the heat shimmering along their edges. At the end, he said quietly, titles don't matter much. He stepped to the side. The guards did not move this time. Perhaps because they sensed something had shifted. Perhaps because even they understood that whatever was happening beyond those doors was no longer political. It was personal. Daniel approached the obsidian surface. Up close, he could see faint scorch marks forming along its seams. The Empress's power was building. The planetary atmosphere would not withstand much more. He placed his hand against the door. It burned instantly. He didn't pull away. He closed his eyes briefly. Not praying. Just steadying himself. Behind him, one guard spoke one final time. If you anger her. Daniel nodded without turning. I know. He pushed. The doors did not resist. They opened inward. Heat flooded the corridor like a released furnace. Wind whipped outward, carrying ash and the scent of scorched stone. Inside, the throne sanctum glowed red. And at its center, the largest dragon in the empire knelt beside a flame that refused to rise. Daniel stepped through. The doors closed behind him. And the storm outside intensified. The doors sealed behind him with a sound like a tomb closing. Heat swallowed the air. The throne sanctum was vast, a cathedral carved from black crystal and volcanic stone, its ceiling disappearing into darkness high above. Rivers of molten light ran through channels in the floor, pulsing in rhythm with something unstable. At the center of it all, she knelt. The Dragon Empress of Virex Prime. Her wings, vast enough to eclipse warships, were folded inward tightly, wrapped around herself like armor that no longer protected. Her scales, once radiant molten gold, had dimmed into a storm gray laced with cracks of red light beneath the surface. Power leaked from those fractures. Not controlled. Not refined. Raw. Before her hovered a suspended flame bier, a platform of condensed energy holding the still form of her son. Prince Kael'thar. His scales were pale. His chest unmoving. The sacred ignition flame beneath him flickered weakly, unable to rise. Dragons did not cremate their dead until the sky was calm. The sky was not calm. Daniel's boot stuck slightly to soften stone as he stepped forward. The floor near her had begun to melt. He stopped several meters away. The air distorted around her like heat above desert sand. She did not turn. But she knew. "You are not a priest," she said. Her voice was low. It vibrated through the chamber, not loud, but immense. The kind of voice that shaped law and ended civilizations. Daniel swallowed. "No. You are not military." "No." A crack of red lightning exploded across the ceiling overhead, spidering outward through the crystalline dome. "Then you are either a fool," she continued, "or you wish to die." Her head tilted slightly, just enough for one molten eye to become visible over her wing. It locked onto him. Daniel felt his pulse hammer in his ears. Every instinct screamed at him to kneel. To bow. To retreat. Instead, he walked forward. Slowly. Carefully. Each step sinking slightly into heated stone. The temperature spiked immediately. The molten channels in the floor surged brighter. Her pupils narrowed. "Leave." It wasn't shouted. It was final. Daniel stopped 2 meters from her. Close enough to feel the heat radiating off her scales. Close enough to see the faint tremor running through her massive form. He lowered himself to the ground. And Saturday. Not directly beside her. Not touching. But close. The chamber reacted instantly. The molten veins in the floor flared. The ceiling groaned. The air pressure dropped. "You dare," she whispered. Daniel stared ahead at the flame bier. "I lost my brother once." The words hung there. Fragile. The sanctum trembled. For a moment, it seemed as if she might incinerate him where he sat today. Instead, the lightning outside faltered. Just slightly. "You compare," she said, voice tightening, "your primitive loss to mine?" Daniel kept his gaze forward. No. Silence. He didn't look at her. Didn't try to meet her eyes. "I just know what it sounds like," he said softly. Another tremor rippled outward from her body. The flame beneath the prince flickered violently. "What does it sound like?" she demanded. Daniel inhaled slowly. "Like the world shouldn't be moving." He swallowed. "Like breathing feels wrong." The molten veins dimmed slightly. She did not speak. He continued. "Like if you stay very still, maybe it isn't real." Her claws tightened against the stone. Cracks spread outward beneath them. "You know nothing of my bond," she said. "You're right," Daniel answered quietly. "I don't." That answer surprised her. He continued before fear could stop him. "But I know what it's like to lose someone you weren't ready to lose." Outside, the thunder softened. Not gone, but distant. The chamber's heat lowered by a fraction. Enough to breathe. Her gaze shifted fully to him now. He felt it like gravity. "Why are you here?" she asked. There was something new in her voice. Not fury. Not command. Something closer to fracture. Daniel stared at the unmoving prince. "Because everyone else is waiting for you to give them someone to burn." The molten channels pulsed once. "Hard." He continued, voice steady despite the heat blistering his skin. "And I don't think that's what you need right now." Silence filled the sanctum. Long. Heavy. For the first time since he entered. The ceiling stopped cracking. The Empress looked back at her son. Her massive wings loosened slightly. Just slightly. And when she spoke again, her voice was no longer that of an empress. It was a mother. "I should have been there." The storm outside weakened. Just a little. And Daniel stayed seated beside her. Not as subject. Not as diplomat. Just, present. For the first time in 3 days. The world did not shake. "I should have been there." The words did not shake the chamber. They barely carried across the molten-lit floor. But they carried weight heavier than fleets. Daniel didn't answer immediately. He had learned something about grief a long time ago. Silence can be more respectful than solutions. The Empress stared at her son's still form. The suspended flame beneath him flickered low and uncertain, mirroring the instability of the world beyond the sanctum. Outside, thunder rolled again. But softer now. Less violent. Like a storm running out of fury. "You do not understand," she said after a long moment. Her claws flexed against the fractured stone, but they no longer cracked it. "Our bond is not symbolic. It is biological. Spiritual. Elemental. When he was born, our flames intertwined. His life strengthened mine." Her voice thinned. "When his heart stopped, I felt it tear." Daniel listened. Not as a courtier. Not as a subordinate. Just as someone who knew what that kind of sentence cost to say. On Earth, grief hid behind walls. Behind stoicism. Behind quiet funerals and hospital corridors that smelled like antiseptic and false hope. Here. It tore the sky open. "You think I will burn the stars in revenge," she continued. Daniel glanced up slightly. "I think you could." The honesty hung between them. The molten rivers along the sanctum floor dimmed another shade. She turned her head toward him fully now. Her eye no longer blazed with volcanic rage. It smoldered. Controlled. Dangerous. But no longer wild. "You are not afraid to die," she said. Daniel gave a small, tired smile. "I am very afraid to die." That surprised her again. "But I was more afraid of what would happen if no one came in here." Outside, lightning struck once. Distant. Muted. The sky beyond the crystal ceiling shifted from violent crimson toward deep ember orange. Her wings loosened another inch. "You presume much, human." "Probably," Daniel admitted. He finally turned slightly toward her, not staring directly into her eye, but close enough to acknowledge her presence. "I just know that when my brother died, everyone kept trying to fix it." He swallowed. "They brought food. Advice. Anger. Blame. They wanted someone responsible." His voice softened. But none of that made the room feel less empty. The sanctum grew quieter. The molten veins along the floor settled into a slow, steady glow. The Empress lowered her head slightly, not in submission. In exhaustion. "You would have me do nothing?" she asked. There was no accusation now. Only a question. Daniel shook his head. "No." He looked back at the prince. "I think you should find out the truth." Her pupils narrowed slightly. "But not because you need something to burn." Another long silence. The air temperature continued to drop. Outside. The wind began to shift. The violent rotational storm patterns that had gripped Virex Prime for 3 days began to unwind. In distant cities, citizens looked up as the red lightning thinned. In the palace corridors, generals paused as the tremors stopped. Inside the sanctum, the Empress unfolded one wing. Not in threat, but in release. The massive appendage stretched outward, then slowly lowered against the floor. She exhaled. And for the first time since the prince's death, the exhale did not shake the planet. "You are maintenance caste," she said quietly. Daniel almost laughed. "Janitorial." She studied him. "Why do humans sit beside pain instead of conquering it?" Daniel thought about that. Thought about Earth's wars. Its scars. Its hospitals and graveyards and quiet kitchen tables where grief lived long after the world moved on. "Because some things," he said gently, "aren't enemies." The last of the lightning flickered out. The sky above the sanctum shifted fully from red to smoldering dusk. The ocean stabilized. Tectonic readouts across the planet returned to baseline. Across the Empire, fleet commanders waiting for annihilation orders received. Nothing. Inside the chamber, the Empress leaned forward. Her massive head lowered beside her son. The sacred flame beneath him began to grow. Steady. Calm. She closed her eyes. When she spoke again, her voice carried strength. But not wrath. "Remain," she said. "Not command. Request." Daniel nodded. "I'm not going anywhere." And outside. For the first time in 3 days. The sky finally breathed. When the sanctum doors opened, no one heard thunder. That was the first sign something had changed. The high general stood rigid in formation, armor polished, wings partially unfurled in readiness. War priests lined the chamber walls. Strategic commanders waited with datapads primed for extermination orders. Orbital fleets were in position. Strike routes calculated. Retaliation scenarios pre-approved. They expected one word. Burn. Instead, the doors opened quietly. No shockwave. No surge of flame. No tremor beneath their feet. The Dragon Empress stepped forward. Her scales had regained their luster, not the blinding molten gold of ceremony, but something steadier. Deep. Controlled. Her wings rested calmly at her back. The sky above the palace was no longer red. It was dusk. Behind her, attendants carefully carried the suspended flame bier. The prince's body remained untouched, awaiting the sacred ignition now that the storm had passed. And walking several paces behind her, a human. Unarmored. Unranked. Alive. Whispers rippled through the chamber. The Empress stopped at the head of the grand hall. Every eye lowered. "Raise your heads," she commanded. They obeyed. Her gaze moved across them, generals who would have gladly shattered galaxies for her grief. "I have heard your request for retaliation." The commanders straightened. Fleet captains tensed. Across orbit, engines idled in expectation. "I will not grant them." The words fell like a stone into still water. Shock followed. A high general stepped forward carefully. "Your Radiance, the border malfunction." She silenced him with a look. "We will investigate." Her voice carried iron now. "We will uncover truth." She stepped down from the dais. "But we will not slaughter blindly." The chamber stilled. "You believe vengeance proves strength," she continued. "Yet strength without control is wildfire." Her gaze flicked, briefly, toward the human standing quietly near the entrance. "Wildfire destroys everything, including what it claims to protect." Silence deepened. Outside, the capital's skyline shimmered peacefully beneath clearing skies. "Our enemies," she said, "would celebrate if grief made us reckless." A pause. "They will not be given that satisfaction." The High General lowered his head slowly. "As you command." Across Imperial space, orders transmitted. "Stand down. Weapons to safe state." Fleet formations dissolved to standard patrol. In distant systems, admirals stared at their consoles in disbelief. The war that had nearly ignited vanished. Inside the hall, the Empress turned toward the sacred pyre balcony. "The rite of returning flame will proceed at twilight." Her voice softened slightly. "And it will proceed in peace." The court bowed deeply. As the assembly dispersed to prepare, the Empress stepped aside into a quieter colonnade overlooking the capital. Daniel hesitated near the doorway. He assumed his role in this was over. He had expected dismissal. Perhaps even quiet exile. Instead, "You will remain." He looked up. She stood beside him now, enormous and radiant against the dark stone, yet no longer overwhelming. "Yes, your Radiance." She studied the horizon. 3 days ago, had you not entered, this empire would be preparing for war. Daniel didn't answer. He didn't need to. "You risked your life," she said. "Yes. For no gain." Daniel shrugged lightly. "Sometimes maintenance work is preventative." A faint sound escaped her. It took him a moment to realize. It was the smallest trace of a dragon's laugh. "You are insignificant within this empire," she said bluntly. "Extremely," Daniel agreed. "And yet," she continued, "your presence shifted the course of nations." She turned one golden eye toward him. "In my grief, I stood at the edge of annihilation." Her gaze returned to the city. "You reminded me that power is not measured by how much we can destroy." The twilight sun dipped low. The prince's pyre flame ignited on the balcony beyond. This time, it rose cleanly. Bright. Steady. Not violent. The sky did not answer with thunder. It answered with calm wind. "Your kind is fragile," she said quietly. "Yes. Short-lived. Very. And yet," she murmured, "you sit beside pain instead of weaponizing it." Daniel exhaled. "We've had practice." She nodded once. "From this day forward, humanity will be recognized as stabilizing allies of the Empire." Daniel blinked. "That seems excessive." "It is precise," she corrected. Her voice grew formal again, not distant, but sovereign. "You have demonstrated a strength we lack in moments of fury." The pyre flame surged upward briefly as the prince's body returned to light. The Empress bowed her head once. Not to the court. Not to the Empire. To her son. Then she turned to Daniel. "You approached not an empress, but a mother." He nodded slowly. "That's what you needed." For a long moment, They stood in silence as the flame burned steady against a peaceful sky. Across the capital, citizens looked upward. The red storms were gone. The oceans were calm. The tremors had ceased. And word began to spread. When rage could have consumed the stars, a human janitor sat down. And an empire chose not to burn.